Hi everyone, and this is John Campbell wishing you a very wonderful day, evening, wherever you are in the world, and a warm welcome from bbsradio.com and all our listeners all over the world. And it's a wonderful opportunity tonight to hear our guest speaker or our guest on the program. And it's been some time since I've been able to be with you. One or two technical problems and travels and health visits, so it's great to be back with you tonight. And I wanted to start our Miracle Hour this evening with a little prayer, if I can. And it's a prayer which comes from A Course in Miracles, and it really helps me to get grounded and understand that this is not a lonely journey which so many think of. So it's just a lovely prayer which I'd like you to join me just by tuning in, if whichever way fits and works with you. And I'm here only to be truly helpful. I'm here to represent Him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do, because He who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever He wishes, knowing He goes there with me. I will be healed as I let Him teach me to heal. And that's it. Now I'm off the hook. So I'm all guided here by the Holy Spirit, and it's always a wonderful pleasure for me to be with you all and to talk with the interesting people which I've been really, really blessed to have had come into my life. And this evening's guest, and I'm going to introduce him very shortly, it's interesting how I came to hear about him. His name's Brian Hutchinson, and he's written a fantastic book called One Boy's Struggle, a memoir, Surviving Life with Undiagnosed ADD. And Brian came into my consciousness via, a lot of you, I guess, will have heard of this movie book which has sort of swept the world called The Secret, with a lot of famous people interviewed on there about the power of manifestation and the power of thought, and what you focus on is what you bring into your life. And it's I think the DVD it's taken some criticism in many different circles, including some of the spiritual circles that feel that in some way it focuses on the materialistic things of life and all that kind of stuff. I personally, having seen the movie many, many times and read the book, I think anything which brings in and raises the consciousness of a greater number of people, I think it reaches a larger audience, I think is a great thing, because, we all know that this journey of life is an ever-evolving search for truth, and there are very different stages. I know that today there are many things which I thought were true 2-3 years ago, which probably were in my reality 2-3 years ago. I don't hold on to those same beliefs today. So, and I also know that when people spoke to me at certain levels 2-3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I just didn't get it. It was like speaking Japanese to a Frenchman or vice versa. So I think it's really important that, people get information at the level of understanding that they have at any one time. And I found that a tough one to remember, and I have to remember it continually. So in that respect, I think The Secret has reached a lot of people, just opening their mind to the power of the mind, just getting to those first stages. So I joined a discussion group, something called Powerful Intentions, which is it's kind of a website where you can put out your intentions and share them with other people who have shared The Secret. And I was on there the other day, and I I'd noticed I'd got this email, and I hadn't checked this site for some time, and I went on, and it was from Brian. And when I read about his book, I got my zing went off, and you've heard me talk about my zing, that's the little bell that seems to be inside me that jingles off as soon as there's something that I need to follow up on, or something I need to listen to, or a book I need to read. And I read a little bit about the basis of his book, and it really, really resonated with me, because for some time now I've had the belief that a lot of these so-called addicts, alcoholics, etc., and all these things, are really underneath it is a very similar pattern that's running, and I've got a lot of identification. And because there's so little understood about it, especially in mainstream education, anything that gets this message out to a greater audience, that we can help people and support people to get to know who they really are, which is their essence, pure perfection, is something that I feel very inspired to assist in. So it's an enormous pleasure to invite Brian on the program tonight, and he's come along this evening to share with you all and talk to us a little bit about his book, about his life, and it's great to have him here. So, Brian, welcome to Miracle Hour.
Thank you.
Brian, when I first... Yeah, thank you. It's great to have you. And Brian is actually, you're in Germany, Brian, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I'm in Germany at the moment.
Yeah. And tell me, what is it you do? Because it's obviously you sound like that you're from the States, which I know you are. So tell us a little bit about what got you over there.
Well, I'm originally from Sacramento, California. I live in Germany because my father was in the military and was stationed over here, and I liked it so much over here that I stayed. We were over here for quite a while, and after he retired, remained here.
Uh-huh. And what age were you when you went over there, Brian?
I was very young. I was 8 years old.
So you were 8, and you'd gone straight from America to Germany. Was that the first place you'd been to outside of America?
No, actually I'd been to Holland first. My mother's from Holland, and we went there first and stayed a little while until my father got us a house here, and then we moved here to Germany.
Oh, okay. Okay. And what I'd like to do is what I do with all my guests is, after they've introduced, is if you wouldn't mind, especially since the subject of your growing up is such a massive part of your book and your story, tell us a little bit about how life was, the kind of, tell us, just start, if you could share with our listeners about your life growing up, how it was, and the kind of things that started, when you look back now, help you to realize that, these were challenges that you were having and you felt different.
Sure. Well, for me, growing up, it was rather difficult, especially in school. I couldn't complete homework assignments. I couldn't finish a lot of the things I started, and I was considered to be lazy. My mother didn't think I was dumb, although I came across that way because I was very distant and very quiet. But I was very distant and very quiet because I was frequently punished whenever I did something wrong. With the old school mentality, if the child's not learning or paying attention, but in all other ways is healthy, then he should be punished. And with that, I became very, very quiet, very, very distant. And in reality, I was becoming depressed and trying to survive within my own mind because I was always afraid I was going to do something wrong. In other words, I didn't do well with friends. I didn't do well with teachers. I didn't do well in school at all. As a matter of fact, throughout my entire career in school, I barely, if ever, passed a grade. And so, and looking back on it, now that I know that I have attention deficit disorder, I can see why I was always in a dream world, because I was always thinking of things, dreaming, and my mind was elsewhere, like off in space, dreaming about being the superhero or something like that. But the very interesting thing about me is that I was very clever, had a very high IQ. I could figure things out, and although I did very, very badly in school with terrible grades, D's and F's as a matter of fact, which in the States is very low grades, I was ahead of my mates or my peers as far as common sense-wise, which was very interesting. I just understood things and didn't know why I understood them, but really could not do well in an environment that was structured and rule-oriented, that I had to know this and had to know that and had to read this. If something was really rule-oriented, like the standard educational system is, I just couldn't get it. I couldn't comply. My mind was elsewhere. I observed, I paid attention in a totally different manner. And that's what a lot of attention deficit disorder kids do, or some call it ADHD. But if you read my book, you'll find out, and you might have, is that I wrote in the first chapter, I might have had ADHD, but my father beat the H out of that, and it turned out to be AD. And not to say that my father was a bad man, it was just the only way he knew how to correct the behavior of a child who was doing these sorts of things or acted out in these sort of ways. And he was a good man. He just, that was his method. And what he didn't know, it was hurting me inside. It was hurting my soul. It was hurting my being. And I didn't think well of myself. So I grew up each and every day thinking a little bit worse of myself. And I withdrew a little bit more. My favorite place to be as a child was in my bedroom alone. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to play. I didn't want to talk to anybody, with this fear that whatever I did was going to get me in trouble. I was so afraid that when my father asked me to go find something like a tool or whatever it was, if it wasn't in the exact place he said it was or where I put it last time, that I was going to be punished. That's how fearful I became. And so, yes, looking back now with attention deficit disorder, I understand myself completely. And tell you the truth, it took 10 years of therapy to really get me to where I am today, and diagnosis was the final and absolute enlightenment for me to understand who I am. And I just had to write about that and tell everybody and help others to get the word out of what exactly this disorder is. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of the mind works. And that it's not all bad. There's a lot of good things about it. There's some attributes that are very positive. And that's something my website tries to point out, too.
Yeah.
Is the positive sides of that. And, that's...
But, the interesting thing, Brian, as I'm listening intently, and I'm fascinated, because, I could relate to so much of what you're saying. And I bet you there'll be loads of our listeners can do the same. But one of my things that I've come to believe and almost philosophize now is that kids don't have disorders. They live in a disorderly world. And if they are honored, supported, and feel safe in every aspect of their environment, that means in the school, in the home obviously first, then, they're going to flourish. But what I think happens is that, it certainly sounds, and I totally get it, that you're not blaming your dad. I think that's a very important piece, and I really appreciate the way that you emphasize that. And I've said this many times on this program when I've done pieces about education, is that it's not a blaming exercise, but it is about acknowledging that there's something that is not working in the traditional system. Right. The traditional parenting and the traditional school system. Because, if kids, I was having this at one of my children's school yesterday, they came out with this, they have to reach this arbitrary stage, this arbitrary standard by this stage, and if they haven't, then there's problems, And my comment is that it's nonsense, because we didn't all learn to walk at the same time. We didn't all learn to talk at the same time. You know, who on earth, which government has the right to turn around and say that unless you reach that stage in that subject by that time, that there's something defective, which is what they're doing. And then, of course, the child starts feeling not fitting in, and really there's nothing wrong. So I'm interested to explore with you and to get you to explain to me, if you could. It sounds like that you were a pretty great guy, and that you were punished. You were. I think you said you were beaten by your dad. Yeah.
Well, the belt. Yes.
Sorry.
I was spanked quite frequently. Yes.
Yeah. So you see, and I'm sure that there's many parents out there that have done the same, and I know that it's something which is very difficult not to do at times. And it's okay if people do that, but it's to recognize that it's not okay. That's the thing that I think helps the kids, so that if that has happened, that there's some acknowledgement quickly by the adult that they did this in a moment when they didn't, when they felt overwhelmed and didn't know how to handle it. But can you really reflect back to when you were really young? How far does your memory go back to?
I believe it goes back to way back when I was 4 or 5 years old.
So when you were those kind of age, did you feel then that there was something different? Did you feel that you didn't fit in, or did you feel any of these things?
Well, the thing was, I don't know exactly when I realized I didn't fit in. I know that I had problems already in kindergarten, and I was actually held back in first grade of all grades, actually. First grade. And it was in first grade that I noticed other kids were doing differently than me. They were able to complete assignments, able to pay attention to the teacher. There was a couple cut-ups, but nothing to the degree where I was constantly looking out the window, constantly lost in thought. And but I had fear already in me at that age that I wasn't complying with what was necessary. And I wanted to comply, but I just couldn't. I don't know how to explain that at that age, because it's very difficult to remember. But I do remember as I grew older into the 3rd and 4th grade, I remember those years clearly, and I was clearly a different kid. I wasn't like any other children around me, and I somewhat felt like an outcast, like I was in the wrong place, because I just didn't get along with anyone, and either I was too far ahead of one person or too far behind another person, and I just didn't catch on to the subtle human communication cues, like if somebody liked me or didn't like me. I just didn't catch on to that. I needed things to be said to me, and this is very typical attention deficit disorder that I needed things said to me specifically, clearly, and not, just, how do I explain, not in a manner that's not clear. I needed to know exactly, and if I wasn't told directly, I had very difficult time understanding. For example, in school, if you're learning something and you're supposed to come up with the end answer, I couldn't do that. I needed it given to me, and once it was given to me, I could hold on to it. Well, I don't know if I answered your question exactly.
No, you really are answering it beautifully, and of course I'm finding myself getting, oh my God, because I can relate to this, and I really understand there's so many kids like this. I used to find the same thing, but you see, the point that I'm making, Brian, really is that I don't know, somehow, if it helps people, like you say it's helped you to understand that you've got this condition, I actually came to another belief, and it's one of my philosophies, is I think that at some level, guys like you, and I think I was the same, and I have a lot of friends, and I know other kids that have the same, at some level know that this is not all there is, and that this harsh, because were you ever labelled too sensitive, oversensitive?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I totally, relate to that. I was told that all the time. And it's like everything was harsh for me. The way people spoke was harsh. The way people were together, I had warring parents and I couldn't stand it. It was so harsh, and I thought, what's this about? And the way the teachers were at school, I went to school in the late 50s, I started. And things were pretty rough then, at school. You would get beaten and caned, and one teacher would go along the line, up and down the lines, and they're hitting us over the back of the head with a sharp-edged ruler, sometimes drawing blood. And it was harsh, and
right. And
I think
I'm sorry to interrupt, but what it is about punishment. Punishment provides adrenaline. It gets a child to stop whatever they're doing or to calm down immediately, but it's not a long-term effective method to correct any kind of behavior. What it does is it creates resentment, it creates pain, and parents just don't realize at the moment that they're punishing a child, that child's not going to forget. That child is going to remember forever.
Absolutely. And this is the point. It goes in, it gets locked in the cells of the body. This is what I got to understand. Those memories get locked and they become cellular memory. And,
exactly.
And this is the point I'm making, you see. I think that these so-called disorders, they're not disorders. They are really the results of unhealed traumas.
Well, I can see exactly where you're coming from, and from your point of view, yes, I agree that 200 years ago we didn't have these disorders because we didn't have educational system standards the way they are today. There is one author, I believe his name is Tom Hartman. He writes about attention deficit disorder as the hunters of the past, those that went out into the woods and they hunted for their prey, and they had to be alert in a different sense rather than today they have to sit in a classroom, whereas 200 years ago they'd be out in the woods hunting already at a young age and being apprenticed to a specific job. In today's world, we're losing talents each and every day because we're putting children in, and people with that are known for having extraordinary talents. But these talents are useless by the time we get out of the school system because they've either faded away, they've been unutilized, and they're just gone. And 200 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. You'd be apprenticed to be a blacksmith, or you'd be working on a farm, or you'd be hunting, or so on. But today, we have to sit down in a chair, stare at the board, and learn in a specific manner. And any talent that's within you, you have a specific amount of time during the day where you can play around and maybe use it. But when you can really utilize it is usually when you're out of high school, out of college, and by then that talent is pretty much faded. Few people really get to use their talent after they get out of school.
Absolutely.
Is my belief.
Oh, no, but you're absolutely right. And the tragedy is that people then go out, and if they don't realize what's happened, they think it's about them. And they have low self-esteem, low self-worth, and the reality is that they have not had anybody who recognizes who they are, recognizes that they've got different gifts than others, and I think they are operating on a higher dimension. I mean, one of my teachers was an amazing woman. I don't know if you've heard of her, called Dr. Doreen Virtue. She's quite a famous author. She writes a lot about angels, and she has a wonderful way of putting it. ADHD, she says ADHD, the medical profession call attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. She said, I prefer to call it attention dialed into a higher dimension.
Wonderful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes, it is. I agree.
And I recommend any of her books. Sorry?
I agree 100% with that saying right there.
Yeah, and that's what it is, you see. I see these amazing kids, and I've got some myself, and they're tuned in, they have a knowing, they have a knowing that this education system is just a joke for them, It works for some, I'm not disputing that, but there's a heck of a lot that it doesn't work for. And for me, it's not rocket science, you see, because fortunately I was led to an education approach which completely blew my mind, and I think I may have mentioned it to you, called the KPM approach to children. And there's a school that's been running for 24 years in India, and they have replicated a model school in Austin in Texas, and if you ever get the opportunity, it's well worth a visit. Now, these kids, from the time they arrive at 4 years of age to the time they leave at 18, they choose to do what they want to do from the moment they arrive to the moment they leave. And that doesn't mean to say that there's bedlam or mayhem. In the younger years, most of the time they just play. However, the teachers are specially trained to get into the child's world with no expectation of the child to get into the adult's world. So all the time, the children's experience is being validated. Their perception of reality is being validated. They're not made right or wrong for what they see or what and they guide the teachers to what they want to do when they're ready to do it. So there is absolutely zero pressure from day one. They only take exams if they request them. There are no arbitrary exams. There is no homework unless they request it. Everything has to come from the child's desire. And the interesting thing is some of them do request it, And they go right the way through the school. And despite not having any of this sort of structured examination systems or whatever, they go out at the other end fantastically rounded, well-adjusted young adults. They get the highest grades at entrance exams to university because they're not afraid. They've never had any fear by having too much pressure put on. And this is my concern, is that so many of kids like yourself and others are getting kind of limited, and it's not that there's anything wrong with them, it's the system that doesn't see them and doesn't honor them.
Sounds like a very interesting school.
It is, and I encourage you, I don't know if I gave you the website, but I've actually had them on my program. But, you see, because the other thing, I suppose, this program is called Miracle Hour, and my teaching that it's brought me to is A Course in Miracles, which I think I spoke to you about. And the Course in Miracles is, it's a spiritual tool. It's a 3-in-1 spiritual document, which was channeled, if you like, by Jesus to a New York intellectual doctor of psychology in 1965. And it's an incredible book, and it reminds us of who we really are. And, that we do have different dimensions of operation, and it's the mind which is what is real, everything else is a projection. And there's a beautiful piece which I just wanted to share with you and our listeners, which is lesson 182 in the course. And it says, I will still be an instant and go home. The reason I chose this was because this exactly explained how I felt most of my life. And it might resonate. And it says, this world you seem to live in is not home to you. And somewhere in your mind, you know that this is true. A memory of home keeps haunting you, as if there were a place that called you to return. Although you do not recognize the voice, nor what it is the voice reminds you of. Yet still you feel an alien here, from somewhere all unknown. Nothing so definite that you could say with certainty you are an exile here. Just a persistent feeling, sometimes not more than a tiny throb, at other times hardly remembered, actively dismissed, but surely to return to mind again. Now, when I read that, I thought, my God, that's exactly how I felt. And it's like I've had this knowing. And my take on all of these so-called disorders is that we're all people that have an overdeveloped understanding that none of this is real.
You know, John, that is, I'm sorry. That's just, I just have to tell you something real quick, is that's an amazing thing what you just said, and I can relate to that so well. As a matter of fact, in my book, Surviving Life with Undiagnosed AD, I talk about continuously a special feeling I have inside that has carried me through all the trauma, all the depression, all the self-loathing, all the self-ridicule. There's always been a feeling inside of myself, a special feeling that there's something more, and that I'm going to achieve that something more, whatever it is. And I've never known what exactly it is, but you just described it so well. And having that feeling inside of me has kept me going, has helped me become a success. And I think your quote there kind of defines my book for me. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Well, this is why, I'm not kidding, Brian. As soon as I read your posting, on the Powerful Intentions website, I knew I had to contact you. I knew that there was a connection here. And the one thing, in my book, which is not yet published yet, it's called Addicts and Angels, where I've made this connection between people who go down the route of addiction and people who have an overdeveloped understanding of the angelic realms, if you like, higher states of consciousness. I wanted to ask you that when you were growing up in your adolescent years and your early years, did you sample alcohol or drugs of any sort?
No. Actually, when I grew up, my father owned, after he was after the military, he owned restaurants, and the smell of alcohol kind of sickened me, and therefore I didn't drink any. I never had any addictions for, for any kind of drug or any kind of alcohol. What I had an addiction for was something totally different, for being by myself, being alone. I didn't absorb myself into a drink or something. I absorbed myself into seclusion, is sort of what my addiction was.
So you kind of numbed out. You anesthetized your sensitive feelings by really just isolating yourself and not interacting with the rest of your peers and society. Is that right?
Exactly. Thank you. That is correct.
Tell me, Brian, when this happened, did you find, though, that although it may not have been apparent to you, were you quite popular with people? Did they like you, and did they want you to sort of come out of your shell when you did get to interact, or how did that work?
Well, in my teens, I discovered that I was quite popular amongst people as far as them wanting to be my friends as other teens. And then when I got in my 20s and I had to enter the workforce, folks just wanted to be around me, and they wanted to talk to me, and they wanted to enjoy time with me. But I had been withdrawn for so long that I wasn't able to do that. It took a long time until I actually got therapy. Was I able to come out of my shell and actually get some, friends and enjoy other people? I have one or two friends growing up, and I write about them, very special people to me. And these friends that I had, they had no expectations of me. If I didn't call them one day, they weren't going to hate me. And if I didn't show up at, some kind of party or something, they weren't going to hate me. And they were kind of really good friends in that they accepted me for who I was. But it took therapy to really get me to come out of my shell. But yes, to answer your question, a lot of folks did want to get to know me and try and pull me out. Yes.
Yeah, that's another thing. So you were popular, and was it a case that really you were not aware of that. There was kind of something within you because your own sense of self was so low that you didn't realize you were popular.
That's correct.
Yeah. And tell me, when the guys that the friends that you did link with, did you find a connection with them as special like that? It was like instant and you could get on to them and you could talk with them and was it like that?
Yes, it was. And like I said, no expectations.
No, that's it. But you see, what I believe it is that what I've seen with these kids, Mike, is when they're with those who are on the same wavelength, and I talk in these terms because that's what we are. We're vibrational beings of light,
Mm-hmm.
and people operate on different wavelengths. So if I'm operating at, a higher rate of vibration than somebody else, it makes it difficult to actually communicate. It doesn't mean I'm better. It doesn't mean they're worse. It's not about that. It's like I always liken it to trying to fix 12-volt electricity with 124-volt,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I think, did you find these people that, you just got along with, it was like everything flowed. You didn't have to explain yourself. They didn't have to explain themselves to you.
Exactly. No expectations. And you're right. The wavelength was there from the onset, and these friends, because of that vibrational feeling that you're talking about, which is true, have always been my friends ever since. And I could write them today after not talking to them for years, and we continue on. And that has happened, as a matter of fact. I got a hold of a friend of mine after not talking to her for 17 years, and suddenly we were just talking like we hadn't missed a beat.
That's it. That's another identification I have. So it doesn't matter. It's like, do you have that understanding that you don't actually have to be with someone to connect with them? It's like they're in your heart. Like you know that you're joined at some level, and that it doesn't matter if you haven't seen each other for so many years. You just connect every time.
That is true. Yes.
Yeah. Wow, this is amazing. And I wonder, could you tell us a little bit now about what happened? What was the turning point with you, and at what age? I'd like to really get our listeners to get a hold of this, because I'm hoping people will be listening who are teachers, etc., and parents. What happened, and what started to shift, and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what happened is exactly what I was discussing earlier when I said that kids are not able to utilize their talents. When I was finally able to explore my talents, I started to come out of my shell. Of course, I mentioned therapy later on, but really it started when I found a pool table, billiards, and I started playing. And I had this extraordinary gift, and I still do, to be able to just make any shot. And I got absorbed in that, and I started to feel good about myself, and my self-confidence, my self-esteem started to rise. And in order to play more, I had to get involved with other people, because you have to have people to play with. And I wanted to show off. I was so happy with myself. I wanted to say, hey, world, here I am. And I was doing something finally good that was getting noticed for good. And I wasn't getting beat down, And once I was able to utilize my God-given talent in writing and in playing pool, I started to meet people. I started to talk to people. And by the way, my job for a while was as a public affairs person, believe it or not. So this is how much, once you start using your talent, is important. That's how important it is for somebody like me that was so withdrawn to become a public affairs representative for a global company is quite an accomplishment. So yes, once I started utilizing my talents, I was able to rise above my inner turmoil.
But what I'm interested in, that during your childhood years, you said you got low grades or really low grades and everything else. But what age did you start to get some help in the way of therapy? Was that as a child or?
No, that was as an adult. I ended up dropping out of school. I had to get out of high school because I could not, I just couldn't do it. So I was taken out of high school in 10th grade, and I didn't seek therapy until I was 28 years old.
Right. And how were relationships like for you with relationships with the opposite sex, with girls and women, you know?
That I discussed too, is they were kind of weird. I kind of didn't get the subtle human communication cues between man and woman. I didn't really know when girls liked me. But later on I found out a lot of girls liked me and a lot of girls wanted to go out with me, but I just didn't get it, and I didn't realize, and I was often confused when a girl did like me and I did go out with her. I had this self-ridiculing that I just didn't believe I was worthy, and the relationship would just end. It wasn't very easy for me.
Right. So that was a struggle. And did you? I mean, when you left school, when you dropped out of high school, what did you go into? What did you do?
I ended up working for my father until I was 18, and then when I was 18, I went to work for someone else, obviously, but and I kind of stayed away from my father at that point. I punished him back in my own manner, which I also write about, by not communicating with him anymore, because I just didn't want any more negativity in my life. And once I got away from the negativity, that also helped. But I went on to work for my dad until I was 18. Once I moved out of the house, my mother started to help me more. She was more free to help me, and I got my GED, which in the States is the equivalent of a high school diploma. And then I went on to college, take some college courses, which my mother was so nice enough to pay for me.
Mm-hmm. And did you find that your writing skills developed over a period of time, or was that something that you always had? Because you sound so fluent and so eloquent. You speak beautifully. So I'm interested to know when that kicked in.
Well, I started writing at a very young age. I can't even tell you the age that I started writing. But I've always loved to write. The funny thing is, I never finished anything that I wrote until I wrote my memoir, my book. I have so many incomplete novels, short stories, you name it, I've written it, and I've never finished. But once I discovered, by the way, the secret, once I discovered the secret in visualizing and actualizing what you want to accomplish and believing in it, and that's what I really just don't understand, the criticism of the secret, because what folks just don't realize is all that Rhonda Byrne is trying to tell folks is that if you believe in yourself, if you can visualize it and see it in your mind and get a firm grip on that visualization, you can manifest it. You can bring it into being, because it's what you want inside. It's what you desire. And that's what we really need to get our motivation going. Yeah, it can be hard work. Yeah, it just doesn't poof and it's there. You got to work hard for it. But if you don't believe you can do it, you're not going to do it. And that's what she's trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm totally with you. I also, I don't like anything to be kind of ridiculed in the way that has been. I don't think that's healthy. But it's just like everything's for people at a different stage, a different learning, and I do believe that there is another level as well, which goes into connection with spirit. That there's certain things that if it's not meant to happen, nothing you're going to do is going to make it happen, because there's a learning that has to go on. I do believe there are different levels, but they come to people at the right time. That's what I believe in.
Well, I think,
and the other thing. Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What I was thinking is, when somebody desires something strong enough, it's usually when they have a talent within them that they can use. Because normally, I don't think folks are going to have an inner desire for something they simply can't do. Like, for example, traveling to the moon. Someone that has an inner desire for that isn't exactly going to be somebody that's going to go and be a seamstress.
But it's interesting, one of the things that I often say when I'm around, in fact, I was talking to another young person. I love to talk to young people, who have just go to college or whatever. And the one question I always say to them is, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to do, And the number of times they say, I haven't got a clue. And I think that is a really sad indictment of the education system that they've been through, because if they've been in the hands of a system for 14 years, 15 years, whatever, and they come out and they don't know what they want to do, they don't know what their passion is, there's something really amiss there. And, because at the end of the day, I totally believe that whatever is in your heart, whatever you're passionate about, is what you're supposed to do. And I actually worked with this young lady today and asked her to close her eyes and imagine that she had $10 million in the bank and she didn't have a single family member, because family are often the ones that influence us wrongly, And I said, do you know what you'd like to do, And she said that's a great. She said that was a great exercise, because she immediately got that she wants to dance. And that's right. That's the path. So whatever you do, even if you take some other kind of job, as long as you do that in the consciousness that is going to support what you really want to do, that's okay. But it is really about following your passion, and then that everything's going to flow.
I agree completely.
So what was the next stage of your? I'm interested to know, when you got into therapy, what prompted that, and where did you go for that, and how did you find it and supported you?
Well, it took me a long time to realize that I needed help. I was in denial, I guess you would say, of the fact that I did need help. I felt like I was a special person, and that special feeling inside of me kept me going, but I wasn't achieving anything. I wasn't going anywhere. And I was getting so frustrated with myself that I was on the brink. The brink of what? I'm not exactly sure, but I'm sure it wasn't good. And so I finally decided I needed to talk to somebody. And so I started seeking out a psychologist or psychiatrist or somebody who could just, talk to me. And I had to go through a couple of them before I found the right one where I had that vibrational connection with. And I write a lot about him. He's a wonderful therapist. And once I started talking to him, he helped me uncover thoughts that I didn't even know I had, thoughts on top of thoughts that I had been contemplating my entire life, but never really on the surface of my mind. I never judged my thoughts. I never dissected my thoughts and tried to find out what I really... and he helped me see that I'm very insightful, that I'm very articulate, that I can really relate well with others if I want to. And he helped me see that some of my negative thoughts were from circumstances that surrounded me, but not who I was as a person.
Yeah.
And
that is so,
and that's something I really try to get across in my book most of all, is sometimes we're surrounded by these circumstances and these concepts and these rules and these structures in the educational system where you can go, like you said, 14 or 16 years without knowing what you're going to do. And that's not who you are, though.
That's it. And what was the type of therapist, this therapist? I mean, you write about him in the book, so it's not confidential. What was the guy's name?
Gary. Dr. Gary is his name.
I
don't give his full name, but I call him Dr. Gary in the book.
What was the model? What was his model of therapy? Was he dialectical behavioral therapist or cognitive behavioral therapist? What type was it?
He's a psychologist, actually. I'm not exactly sure if you'd call him behavioralist. Here in Germany, it's a little bit different as far as their descriptions. He is basically a psychologist in therapy, Behavioral, yes. He doesn't believe necessarily in medication, and I haven't taken any kind of medication for my attention deficit disorder. So
that's wonderful. So they never got you on Ritalin, though?
No drugs whatsoever. I did take an SSRI for about 6 weeks, and the side effects were so bad that I didn't take it anymore. But that was my experience. I didn't. And
just tell our listeners, what is an SSRI?
SSRI, you'll know as Prozac. Or,
so it's the antidepressant inhibitor.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that name out there, sorry.
No, that's okay, not a problem. No, we're for here. Okay, so in other words, an antidepressant. So were you actually diagnosed as depressed?
Yes.
You were?
Yes, I was.
Yeah,
and that was the initial and post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's it. Well, that's what I said. I was saying to one of the teachers the other day that most kids are flying around, with different levels of post-traumatic stress disorder. If they've been shouted at, screamed at, hit, beaten, told they're not good enough, that's traumatic for a young kid that believes everything that they're told by their carers or their teachers.
Yes.
And what was the effect when you had the antidepressants? Did you take those for a long time?
No, I only took it for 6 weeks, and the feelings I had just weren't good. So I never benefited from any of its effects per se. 6 weeks isn't long enough. My system just didn't get along with it, so I stopped taking it.
Yeah. And what about your interaction with did you do any anger release? Because I think a lot of depression is repressed anger, really.
Well, I wouldn't say I took any anger release, but one of the things that has helped me the most is Tai Chi. Tai Chi, the breathing exercises of Tai Chi have such a calming effect on my body and help my mind focus so much that has helped me. But no, not for anger. I'm not an angry person.
No,
per se.
Okay. Yeah, and but that's interesting because a lot of these things are coming out now. A lot of people are involved in Tai Chi and Qigong is another one, isn't it? That seems very popular. So would you say that's something that you would encourage people who can identify and relate to what you're talking about today?
I certainly would. Tai Chi is wonderful.
Yeah. And now your book, it's amazing that you got that out. How long did it take you to write?
Actually, it didn't take me very long to write at all. It took me about a year. And considering that I've never finished anything in my life as far as writing goes and so on, for myself, this is a really major accomplishment for me. And it's getting some really fantastic reviews, which I don't know if I expected that or not, but I did visualize them.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. I've just been reading them, and it's remarkable. And I'm so pleased to see it out there on Amazon and the reviews that you've got, because I feel that when somebody reads this stuff, it's like anything else. You get a release and you say, oh, my God, that's exactly how I am or exactly how I was, and look what's happened. And have you started to get invitations yet to speak about your book?
Yes, and that's kind of, you asked a question of kids earlier, what do you want to do in your life? And you hit the nail on the head. After I got out of high school and after I stopped working for my father, I had no clue. But today, I do. I want to write more about helping others and help others with attention deficit disorder. I would like to speak in open forums, speak to schools, speak to children, parents, guardians, and teachers about attention deficit disorder and bring across to them that, this isn't a bad thing. These kids are not bad kids, but we're raising bad kids, in some of our standards and some of our beliefs and really, most of all, our denials of what's wrong. And you said them so well. What is wrong is these standards and going to school for 14 years and not having a clue of what you want to do, something is definitely wrong there. And if we can get that across to folks and help them realize that these kids need to explore some of their talents and their inner feelings, we'll go a long way, and punishment is just not the answer. It's a very, very limited solution that has detrimental effects.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, I am amazed. It's hard to believe that we're already almost at time's up. It's been so fascinating listening to you, and that's what they say, time flies when you're having fun. But just very briefly, if you can, because we're on a tight schedule, just please tell the listeners again the name of your book and your website, because I know you've got a website, please.
Right. The name of my book is One Boy's Struggle, a Memoir, Surviving Life with Undiagnosed AD. And my website is www.adderworld, ADDER, WORLD.com, adderworld.com. And you can find my book buy books on the web.com and Amazon.com and other online retailers.
Fantastic. Well, that's wonderful. Well, Brian, it's been a great pleasure and a very, very informative evening having you come on Miracle Hour. Thank you for your time, and I know we'll be in contact again, and I wish you every success in your future. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye, Brian.
Bye-bye.